What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some details from the recently showcased Stalker 2. Now, also recently, this game got delayed from September to November 20th, but in the wake of that, they did decide to do a deep dive of the game's systems and everything, and talk a little bit about what you can experience or expect from Stalker 2, of course. And I thought I would sort of recap some of that for you. I'll post a link to the video in the description below if you want to watch it for yourself. But for those completely unaware of what this is, because admittedly it's a little outside of my own normal wheelhouse, with this one being a more open world FPS title with elements of like survival and stuff, so it has elements of a lot of different genres, but the series itself was originally from the late 2000s, with Stalker 2 here technically being the fourth entry into the series, the original trilogy ending back in 2009. And like all of those games, this one takes place in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, or an alternate version of it, following, of course, the disaster back in 1986. In this alternate version, a bunch of experiments were being conducted here, which led to a second disaster in 2006, causing all of the anomalous mutations of everything that we see in the video games. And while the original series is much loved, let's first talk about what this game is going to be all about, as it's been so long since those original three that I think it's safe to say this game will be out to capture a much different audience. Now, first and foremost, the developers talked a lot about the open world itself and some of their design philosophies going into it. Mainly that they want the entire thing to feel very lonely, anxiety-inducing, but mostly giving you a sense of freedom to explore this very desolate place at your own leisure, so to speak. In fact, the story for the game itself is apparently going to be non-linear and extremely branching, and you're free to do most of that in any order you please. They really wanted to drive home just how branching that story was, putting a big emphasis on replayability to really highlight that sense of freedom that they're trying to capture with their open world. Now, the open world itself is going to be apparently comprised of 20 distinct regions, each of which are going to be home to their own anomalies, factions, architecture, you name it. Now, anomalies, if you're just completely unaware of this kind of game, are just little things that can happen that defy the laws of physics or things like that. So think all sorts of almost paranormal phenomenon that can be activated and lead you to certain death, or in this case, even provide some benefit. Not all of these anomalies are going to be negative. They actually gave an example of one that will cushion you from a high fall, causing you to bounce a bit, but just that stuff won't be the only way you can interact with the environment. They gave an example of a lightning storm moving through an area, and the lightning strikes are real. They can damage enemies or you if you're near them. Now, story-wise, and what we're going to be up to in the exclusion zone here is a little more up in the air. They gave a few details, but like broad plot stuff they kept pretty under wraps, though it looks like our character will be a person named Skiff, who they described as a pretty much normal person, just with a complicated destiny, whatever it is they're implying with that. But what this character gets up to is going to be up to you, and how you interact with the game's factions, and what happens to them, and who you choose to help or trust versus who you choose to simply attack is going to make up a lot of the different story beats that will show you a slice of what might happen. Again, they really tried to drive home the replayability of this with things like the factions in particular. Now, factions themselves were described as having leadership that can change. Apparently, the factions, even on their own, might have some differences between their viewpoints on their own ideologies, which can lead to these power shifts, which might even lead to these factions simply dissolving altogether, though they did leave it a little bit vague how much of that will be dependent upon the player interacting with them, and perhaps pushing some of these things to their conclusions. But it certainly sounds promising enough for what it is. So while it certainly sounds like the story and the world are going to be up my alley with all sorts of choice and consequence, it's important to remember that this isn't like a traditional RPG where there's like levels and things that you'll be gaining as you go. Rather, the progression of this game is down to the equipment you can find and scrounge up alongside the knowledge gained as you move through the world and start to see how it works and are able to, of course, dissect it from there. Given that they talk about how you're free to go pretty much anywhere at any time based upon your own abilities, it kind of sounds like just the simple act of finding something and thus knowing where that is going forward is going to play into the progression like we saw sometimes with older games previously. Now, on the side of equipment though, there's apparently going to be about 35 different weapons that can be modded and optimized or changed out to your heart's content, which will of course change how they play, which is important because you're going to be using those against all sorts of mutated animals and things in the exclusion zone here, to include things like pseudo-dogs, which are able to call in packs of like phantom hounds, Bayun the cat, which seems to be a sort of unique mutant that they showed off that mimics the cries of a hurt person to draw you into a church, which leads to a fight with it. There's also controllers, enemies that will increase the amount of radiation present as they attack, meaning that you want to take them out quickly because they're usually going to be assisted by a large number of zombies. Zombies, of course, being pretty much what you'd expect, though they will get up after you kill them if you don't shoot them in the head. They were a little vague on how exactly that worked, but they can get back up is the main thing. And then there was another enemy they described as flesh, which were just these mutated pig things that came at you in great numbers. And you have to deal with all of that while, of course, navigating the actual anomalies, some of which can be very harmful to your well-being, such as flame spouts bursting up out of the ground, or little tornadoes that will throw you up in the air, and things of that nature. But when it comes to enemies in particular, it seems that the theme they're going for are simply things that are distorted versions of humanity and real-life animals and things of that nature. But while we're handling all of that, there do seem to be at least some light survival elements where you're going to have to eat and sleep as our character here, which they described as reducing your efficiency if ignored. Now, the efficiency part of that is a little vague, but if I had to take a stab at it, I would assume this would affect things like carry weight, which is going to be a thing, or perhaps simply like reticle sway when you're aiming down sights, to name just a few potential things they could possibly do there. But again, not exactly sure what they were referring to specifically. Now, I would say that's pretty much all of the key highlights from this particular deep dive, though we won't have to wait too much longer, I imagine, to either learn more or simply have the game in our hands, as this is hitting PC and Xbox on November 20th. Though speaking for myself, I would say this deep dive especially has my interest piqued, though I was planning on taking a look at it before this anyway. But this looks pretty cool, even if it's not exactly something I would normally play. So it'll be curious, for me at least, to see how this one winds up shaping up. So if you're looking forward to any of that coverage, or you simply enjoyed this video, do remember to like, comment, subscribe, stick around, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.